Ghastly Garlic Episode 12. The Crimson Mark. Prologue. In the heart of a small, unassuming town in Russia nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there exists a haunting legend that chills the bones of even the most skeptical inhabitants. The story is whispered among townsfolk, passed down through generations like a cautionary tale, always beginning with the same chilling phrase, "Beware the house with the red spot." It is said that in the oldest part of town, where cobblestone streets wane like serpents and shadows linger long after the sun has set, there stands an apartment building with a sinister history. This building, modest and ordinary at first glance, harbors a dark secret, a blood-red spot that appears on the wall of one of its apartments. The spot is unlike any ordinary stain. It resists all efforts to remove it, persisting through scrubbing, painting, and wallpapering as if taunting those who dare to try. According to the legend, the red spot is not merely a blemish on the wall, but a harbinger of death and despair. Each night, as the town sleeps under the watchful eyes of the moon and stars, the spot grows more vivid, its crimson hue deepening with an almost malevolent glow. And with each passing night, one of the apartment's occupants is claimed by an inexplicable death. The townspeople believe that the spot is a curse, a malevolent force that feeds on the living, growing stronger with every soul it consumes. Many years ago, a family lived in the apartment, unaware of the curse that awaited them. One by one, they succumbed to mysterious ailments and accidents, their lives snuffed out like candles in a gust of wind. After their deaths, the apartment remained vacant for years, shrouded in an aura of fear and superstition. Occasionally, a new family would move in, lured by the apartment's affordability and charm, only to flee in terror as the red spot reappeared and the cycle of death began anew. The legend of the red spot is a topic of hushed conversations and nervous glances among the townspeople. Children dare each other to approach the building, while adults warn of the consequences of tempting fate. Despite the passage of time and the changes in the town, the story remains a constant, a dark thread woven into the fabric of the community's collective memory. As the Ivanov family prepares to move into their new home, they are blissfully unaware of the legend that looms over their new apartment. They are eager for a fresh start, looking forward to the promise of new beginnings and a brighter future. But the red spot awaits, patient and unyielding, ready to unleash its curse once more. The apartment may seem like any other, but within its walls, an ancient evil stirs, waiting for the night to fall and the cycle to begin again. Chapter 1. A fresh start. The Ivanov family arrived in the quaint town of Lesnoy with a mixture of excitement and relief. The town, with its cobblestone streets and old-world charm, promised a peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of the city. Mikhail, the father, had secured a new job at the local factory, and the family was eager to settle into their new life. Their new apartment was located in a historic building on the edge of town. It was an old structure, with ivy creeping up its brick facade and a creaky wooden staircase leading to their third-floor unit. Despite its age, the apartment was charming, with high ceilings, large windows, and a cozy atmosphere that immediately felt like home. As they unpacked their belongings, Mikhail and his wife Svetlana marveled at their good fortune. The apartment was not only affordable, but also spacious enough for their two children, Ivan and Anya, to have their own rooms. The children, excited by the move, ran from room to room, imagining all the new adventures they would have in their new home. It was during one of these explorations that Anya noticed something peculiar in the living room. "Papa, Mama, come and look at this," she called out, her voice echoing through the empty space. Mikhail and Svetlana hurried to see what had caught their daughter's attention. On the far wall of the living room, partially obscured by an old, faded painting, was a red spot. It was about the size of a dinner plate, a deep crimson colour that stood out starkly against the pale wallpaper. At first they thought it might be a stain or perhaps some leftover paint from a previous tenant. "That's strange," Mikhail said, examining the spot closely. "Let's see if we can clean it off." Armed with a bucket of soapy water and a scrub brush, Mikhail set to work. He scrubbed vigorously, but no matter how hard he tried, the spot remained. Svetlana joined him, trying different cleaning solutions, but nothing seemed to make a difference. It was as if the red spot was part of the wall itself, impervious to their efforts. "This is ridiculous," Svetlana muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. "Maybe we should just cover it up." "Let's just cover it with wallpaper," Svetlana suggested, her voice tinged with unease. "Maybe out of sight, out of mind." Mikhail nodded, reluctant but out of options. Together, they carefully applied a new layer of wallpaper, making sure every edge was smooth and every seam was perfect. When they were done, the red spot was hidden and the living room looked normal again. As the family settled in for the evening, they gathered in the living room to relax. Anya was playing with her pet cat, Mishka, while Ivan was engrossed in a book. The atmosphere was calm, but an underlying tension lingered. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the peace. The large mirror on the wall opposite the red spot had fallen, its glass shards scattered across the floor like tiny, glistening daggers. The family jumped, startled and confused. "How did that happen?" Ivan asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mikhail inspected the wall where the mirror had hung. The nails were still in place, and the frame was undamaged. It made no sense. "It must have been loose," he said, though he didn't believe it himself. They cleaned up the broken glass and tried to resume their evening, but the unsettling incident had cast a shadow over their home. When it was time for bed, an uneasy silence filled the apartment. That night, as darkness enveloped the living room, the red spot reappeared, more vivid and menacing than before. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a silent, crimson threat in the heart of their home. Mikhail woke in the middle of the night, a cold sweat clinging to his skin. He had a feeling of being watched, of something sinister lurking just beyond his sight. He tiptoed to the living room, and there it was, the red spot, glowing faintly in the dim light. He felt a chill run down his spine and hurried back to bed, hoping it was just a bad dream. In the morning, the family gathered for breakfast, trying to shake off the eerie events of the previous night. Anya went to check on Mishka, who usually greeted her with a playful meow. But this morning, the apartment was eerily silent. "Mama! Papa!" Anya's voice was filled with panic. Mikhail and Svetlana rushed to her side, only to find Mishka lying still, lifeless. The sight of the dead cat was a shock. Tears welled up in Anya's eyes as she cradled her beloved pet. "What is happening here?" Svetlana whispered, her voice cracking with fear. Mikhail held his family close, feeling helpless and overwhelmed. The red spot had returned, and now it had taken their pet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was only beginning. As they mourned Mishka, the red spot on the wall seemed to grow even brighter, a grim reminder of the darkness that had entered their lives. Chapter 2. Growing Dread. The unease in the Ivanov household deepened with each passing day. The memory of Mishka's death hung heavy over them, and the red spot on the living room wall seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. In various parts of the apartment, strange occurrences multiplied. Lights flickered unpredictably, and cold drafts swept through rooms despite the windows being closed. Doors creaked open on their own, and objects seemed to move just out of sight. Ivan began to have nightmares about the red spot. In his dreams, it grew larger and larger until it consumed the entire apartment, swallowing his family in its crimson maw. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. The image of the red spot burned into his mind. One night, he dreamed of a shadowy figure standing by the red spot, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The figure whispered his name, beckoning him closer. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. When he finally woke, he found himself standing in front of the red spot, his hand outstretched towards it. He stumbled back in horror, his scream finally breaking free. Svetlana, noticing the toll the nightmares were taking on Ivan, decided to dig deeper into the apartment's history. She spent hours at the local library, sifting through old newspapers and records, hoping to uncover the truth about their home. One rainy afternoon, she stumbled upon an old article buried in the archives. It mentioned the mysterious deaths of several previous tenants, but the details were scarce. The article hinted at a series of unexplained tragedies, each marked by a blood-red stain on the living room walls. The tenants had died under peculiar circumstances. Some were found lifeless in their beds. Others had vanished without a trace. Svetlana's heart raced as she read the article. The more she learned, the more she realized that their apartment was a place of dark history and hidden horrors. She couldn't bring herself to share all the details with Mikhail and the children, fearing it would only add to their growing dread. Back at the apartment, Ivan's nightmares continued to plague him. He grew pale and withdrawn, the dark circles around his eyes as testament to his sleepless nights. He tried to talk to his parents about the dreams, but the words seemed inadequate to describe the terror he felt. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Ivan suddenly blurted out, "I see it in my dreams. The red spot. It wants something." Mikhail and Svetlana exchanged worried glances. They knew they couldn't ignore the situation any longer. "We need to do something," Svetlana said, her voice trembling. "This place, it's cursed. We can't stay here." Mikhail nodded, his face set with determination. "I'll find someone who can help us." As they finished their meal in silence, the red spot in the living room seemed to glow brighter, casting an ominous light over the family. The darkness that had entered their lives was growing stronger, and they knew they had to act quickly before it consumed them all. Chapter 3. The kitchen, usually the heart of the Ivanov household, had become shadowed and eerie. The once warm and inviting space now felt cold and unwelcoming. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on everyone, and the persistent sense of dread made even the simplest tasks seem daunting. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, a strange silence filled the room. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by hushed whispers and anxious glances. The events of the past few weeks had taken a toll on them, and the looming presence of the red spot seemed to cast a pall over their lives. After dinner, Mikhail decided to check on his prized fish. He had always found solace in their graceful movements and vibrant colors. As he approached the fish tank, a feeling of unease settled in his stomach. The water, usually clear and sparkling, seemed murky and dark. With a trembling hand, he turned on the light. What he saw made his blood run cold. All his fish were floating lifelessly at the surface, their once vivid colors dulled and their movements stilled forever. "No, no, no," Mikhail muttered, his voice breaking. He knelt by the tank, his heart aching with grief and frustration. "Why is this happening?" "Svetlana," hearing his distressed cries, rushed to his side. When she saw the dead fish, she gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Oh, Mikhail, not the fish too. Ivan and Anya, drawn by the commotion, stood at the kitchen door, their eyes wide with fear. The sight of their father's anguish and the dead fish added to their growing sense of terror. As they stood there, the red spot in the living room seemed to pulse with an even more ominous glow. It cast a sickly red light that seeped into the kitchen, making the shadows dance and twist. "We can't stay here," Svetlana whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to leave." Mikhail shook his head, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. "We can't just run. We need to find out what's causing this and stop it." Svetlana looked at him, her eyes pleading. "But what if we can't? What if it takes one of us next?" Mikhail wrapped his arms around her, trying to offer some comfort. "We'll find a way. I promise." That night, the family huddled together in the living room, too afraid to sleep in their separate rooms. The red spot glowed brighter than ever, casting an eerie light over them. Every creak of the apartment, every rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. Ivan lay awake, his eyes fixed on the red spot. He could feel its presence, malevolent and hungry. The nightmares had warned him, and now he knew that the spot was not just a stain, it was something much darker, something that fed on their fear and despair. As the night wore on, the red spot seemed to pulse with a life of its own, growing brighter and more menacing with each passing hour. The family clung to each other, their hearts heavy with dread, knowing that whatever curse had befallen their home was far from over. In the dim light of the early morning, Mikhail made a silent vow. He would find a way to protect his family and rid their home of this malevolent force. He had to, before the red spot claimed another victim. Chapter 4. The Haunting Past. Svetlana Ivanov walked briskly towards the local historical society, her mind racing with questions. The cold morning air did little to ease her anxiety as she hurried through the town. She had to find answers, anything that could explain the malevolent force in their apartment. The Historical Society was housed in an old, weathered building that exuded an aura of forgotten tales and buried secrets. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of aged paper and dust. Svetlana approached the front desk, where an elderly woman with kind eyes looked up from her book. "Excuse me," Svetlana said, her voice steadied despite her nerves. "I'm looking for information about the apartment building on 14 Gorky Street, particularly any unusual history it might have." The woman's expression turned serious. 14 Gorky Street, you say? That's a place with a troubled past." She motioned for Svetlana to follow to the archive room. The archive room was dimly lit, with rows upon rows of old records and documents. The woman led Svetlana to a corner where stacks of yellowed newspapers and dusty ledgers lay undisturbed. "You'll find what you're looking for here," she said. "Good luck." Svetlana nodded her thanks and began sifting through the records. Hours passed as she pored over articles and records, the weight of the past pressing down on her. Just when she was about to lose hope, she found it, a newspaper article from several decades ago. The headline read, "Tragic Family Murder on Gorky Street." Her heart pounded as she read the details. A family of 4 had been brutally murdered in their apartment on 14 Gorky Street. The article described the horrific scene, the walls stained with blood, the bodies left in grotesque positions. The police had been baffled, unable to find any clues or motive. Further into her research, Svetlana uncovered more articles about the incident. Neighbors had reported strange noises and sightings in the apartment leading up to the murders. After the family was found, no one wanted to live there. The building had changed owners multiple times, and every new tenant experienced unexplainable phenomena. One article mentioned that a local spiritualist had visited the apartment shortly after the murders. She claimed that the spirits of the murdered family were restless, their souls bound to the place where they met their tragic end. The red spot on the wall was believed to be a manifestation of their blood and their anger, a curse that would not be lifted until their spirits found peace. Svetlana sat back, her hands trembling. The red spot, the deaths, the unrelenting sense of dread. It all made sense now. Her apartment was haunted by the restless spirits of the murdered family, their pain and anger woven into the very fabric of the building. She gathered the articles and left the Historical Society, her mind spinning with the dark secret she had uncovered. As she made her way home, a sense of urgency gripped her. She had to share what she had learned with Mikhail and the children. They needed to understand the true nature of the evil that plagued their home. When she arrived at the apartment, Mikhail was waiting for her, his face etched with concern. "Did you find anything?" he asked. Svetlana nodded, her expression grave. "Yes, and it's worse than we thought. Decades ago, a family was murdered in our apartment. Their blood stained the walls, and their spirits are restless. The red spot is a manifestation of their torment." Mikhail's eyes widened in shock. "So, what do we do? How do we make it stop?" "We need to find a way to help their spirits find peace," Svetlana said, determination in her voice. "It's the only way to break the curse." As the family huddled together, the red spot glowed ominously in the background, a constant reminder of the darkness they had to confront. They knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but armed with the truth, they were determined to face the haunting past and free their home from its malevolent grip. Chapter 5. Unraveling. The apartment on 14. Gorky Street felt like a prison. The once cozy home had become a place of dread, its walls seemingly closing in on the Ivanov family. The red spot on a living room wall pulsed with a malevolent energy, a constant reminder of the darkness that gripped their lives. Ivan's nightmares had grown more intense. Each night, he was tormented by vivid, horrific visions of the murdered family. He saw their final moments in agonizing detail. The screams, the blood, the terror etched on their faces. In his dreams, the red spot expanded, consuming everything in its path. He woke each morning drenched in sweat, his heart racing, the images burned into his mind. Mikhail watched helplessly as his son suffered, the weight of their plight pressing down on him. He knew they couldn't endure this much longer. Desperation gnawed at him, driving him to seek help wherever he could find it. One morning, after another sleepless night, he made a decision. "I'm going to see Father Dmitri," Mikhail announced at breakfast, his voice resolute. Svetlana looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Do you think he can help?" "We have to try," Mikhail replied. "We can't keep living like this." Father Dmitri was the priest at the local church, known for his compassion and wisdom. Mikhail explained their situation, detailing the red spot, the deaths and Ivan's nightmares. The priest listened attentively, his expression grave. "I've heard of such things," Father Dmitri said. "Spirits down to a place by violent ends, their rest disturbed. I will come to your apartment and bless it. Perhaps that will provide some relief." That afternoon, Father Dmitri arrived at the apartment, his presence bringing a sense of calm. He walked through the rooms, his eyes taking in the oppressive atmosphere, the pervasive sense of dread. In the living room, he stood before the red spot, his face set with determination. He began to pray, his voice steady and clear. He sprinkled holy water on the walls, his words resonating with a power that seemed to push back against the darkness. For a moment, the family felt a glimmer of hope. The air seemed to lighten, the shadows retreating. But as Father Dimitri's prayers grew stronger, the red spot began to glow brighter, its sinister light intensifying. It pulsed angrily, as if defying the priest's efforts. Father Dimitri's voice faltered, his eyes widening in shock. "This is no ordinary haunting," he murmured. "The spirits here are deeply tormented. This will take more than a blessing to resolve." The red spot's glow filled the room, casting an eerie red light over their family. Ivan clutched his head, a scream of pain escaping his lips. "It's too strong," he cried. "It's angry." Father Dimitri placed a comforting hand on Ivan's shoulder. "We need to find what binds these spirits here. There must be something keeping them from moving on." Svetlana nodded, determination in her eyes. "The murders. We need to understand what happened and why. Only then can we hope to set them free." As Father Dimitri left, promising to return with more help, the family gathered in the living room, the red spot's ominous glow a constant reminder of their peril. They knew that unraveling the mystery of the past was their only hope. The spirits of the murdered family were trapped in a cycle of torment, and only by uncovering the truth could they hope to break the curse that bound them all. Chapter 6. A desperate plan. The oppressive atmosphere in the apartment was becoming unbearable. The red spot on the living room wall seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, its malevolent energy seeping into every corner of their home. The Ivanovs knew they couldn't endure this much longer. They needed a solution, and they needed it fast. Father Dimitri visited the family again, his expression grave. He had spent the past few days researching and consulting with fellow priests and spiritual advisors. He had come to a conclusion, but it was a risky one. "There is a ritual we can perform," Father Dimitri explained, his voice steady but serious. "It is not without danger, but it may be our only hope to cleanse this apartment and free the spirits trapped here." Mikhail and Svetlana exchanged worried glances. "What does the ritual involve?" Mikhail asked, his voice tinged with both hope and fear. Father Dimitri took a deep breath. "The ritual requires a combination of prayers, symbols, and the invocation of higher powers. It will need the participation of the entire family, as your collective strength will be crucial. The red spot will resist, and it may lash out, but if we stay strong and united, we can succeed." Fear gripped their hearts, but they knew they had no other choice. They couldn't continue living in constant fear and dread. The family agreed to perform the ritual, their determination outweighing their terror. Over the next few days, they prepared for the ritual. Father Dimitri provided them with instructions and materials, candles, holy water, and sacred texts. The apartment was cleansed and prepared, every corner marked with protective symbols. Despite their fear, a sense of purpose began to fill the family. On the night of the ritual, the family gathered in the living room. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the red spot glowing ominously in the background. Father Dimitri stood at the center, his presence a source of strength and calm. "We must remain united and strong," he reminded them. "No matter what happens, we cannot falter." They formed a circle around the red spot, their hands linked. Father Dimitri began to chant, his voice resonating with power. The candles flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in rhythm with the prayers. As the ritual progressed, the red spot began to pulsate violently, its glow intensifying. The air grew heavy, a palpable sense of resistance emanating from the spot. The apartment seemed to shake. the walls vibrating with an unseen force. The family's fear was palpable, but they held on, their grip on each other's hands tightening. Ivan, despite his terror, joined in the prayers, his voice merging with the others. Anya clung to her mother's side, her small voice trembling but determined. The red spot's resistance grew fiercer, a wave of malevolent energy washing over them. Objects in the room began to rattle, a fierce wind whipped through the apartment. It was as if the very spirit of the place was fighting back, desperate to maintain its hold. Father Dimitri's voice rose above the chaos, his chants growing more powerful and urgent. Spirits of the restless, we call on you to find peace. Release this place and move on to the light. The red spot flared brightly, its light blinding. The family felt a surge of energy, a final, desperate push from the malevolent force. They stood their ground, their united strength forming a barrier against the darkness. Chapter 7. The Final Sacrifice. The storm raged outside, the wind howling and rain pelting against the windows of the apartment. Inside, the Ivanov family stood in the living room, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with tension and fear as they prepared for the final act of the ritual. Father Dimitri stood at the center of the room, his face drawn with fatigue but resolute. "We are almost there," he said, his voice steady. "We must give everything we have to finish this." The family nodded, their resolve firm despite the terror that gripped their hearts. They joined hands, forming a circle around the red spot. Father Dimitri began to chant once more, his voice rising above the storm outside. The red spot pulsed violently, its malevolent energy intensifying. The room seemed to vibrate with an unseen force, the candles flickering wildly. The ritual was reaching its climax, the final push to cleanse the apartment of its dark presence. Suddenly, the red spot flared brightly, a blinding light that filled the room. Father Dimitri's chanting faltered as he was consumed by the intense glow. The family watched in horror as the light enveloped the priest, his body tensing and then collapsing to the floor. "Father Dimitri!" Svetlana screamed, rushing to his side. But it was too late. The red spot had consumed him, his lifeless body a testament to the dark force's power. In that moment, the family realized the terrible truth. The red spot demanded a life to be at rest. The spirits of the murdered family could only be freed by a final, heart-wrenching sacrifice. Mikhail looked at his wife and children, his heart breaking at the sight of their fear and anguish. He knew what had to be done. The decision weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't allow his family to suffer any longer. "Svetlana," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "Take the children and go. Leave this place and don't look back." "No, Mikhail," Svetlana sobbed, clinging to him. "There must be another way." "There isn't," he replied, gently pulling her into his arms. "I have to do this. For you. For Ivan and Anya. I love you all too much to let this darkness destroy us." Tears streamed down Svetlana's face as she realized the depth of his sacrifice. She kissed him one last time, her heart breaking. "I love you, Mikhail. We'll never forget you." Mikhail turned to Ivan and Anya, kneeling down to hug them tightly. "Be strong," he whispered. "Take care of each other. I'll always be with you." With a final, determined breath, Mikhail stepped into the center of the room, facing the red spot. He closed his eyes, his heart filled with love and resolve. The red spot seemed to sense his willingness, its glow intensifying once more. The family watched in tearful silence as Mikhail stood before the red spot, his body tense with anticipation. The light enveloped him, and for a moment he felt a searing pain. But then a sense of peace washed over him. He knew he was doing the right thing. The red spot pulsed one last time, its light consuming Mikhail completely. The room shook with a final burst of energy, and then, just as suddenly, it was over. The red spot was gone, leaving only a faint mark on the wall where it had once been. Svetlana, Ivan, and Anya fell to their knees, their sobs filling the silent room. The storm outside began to calm, the wind and rain easing as if the very world acknowledged their loss. As they gathered together, holding each other tightly, they knew that Mikhail's sacrifice had saved them. The darkness that had plagued their home was gone, banished by his selfless act of love. In the days that followed, the family began to heal. They would never forget the horror they had faced or the price they had paid. But they also knew that Mikhail's spirit would always be with them, guiding them and giving them strength. The apartment, once a place of fear and dread, was now filled with a sense of peace and hope. And though they mourned the loss of Mikhail, they found solace in the knowledge that his sacrifice had freed them all. Chapter 8. Aftermath. The apartment was now eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the stormy chaos of the previous night. The red spot, once a glaring symbol of malevolence, had faded into a faint, barely noticeable mark on the wall. It was as if the darkness had finally released its hold, leaving behind only the faintest whisper of its presence. Svetlana stood in the living room, gazing at the spot where the red stain had been. Her heart ached with the weight of Mikhail's sacrifice. The apartment felt emptier without him, the silence a constant reminder of what they had lost. Ivan and Anya sat nearby, their faces drawn with grief but also a quiet strength. They had been through so much, and their father's bravery had given them the chance to move forward. "We should pack our things," Svetlana said softly, breaking the silence. "It's time to leave this place behind." The children nodded and they began to gather their belongings. Each item packed felt like a step towards healing, a way to honor Mikhail's memory by moving forward with their lives. The task was somber, but also a small source of solace. They were leaving the cursed apartment, but they were doing it together as a family. As they worked, Svetlana couldn't help but glance at the faint mark on the wall. It was a reminder of the darkness they had faced, but also of the love and sacrifice that had ultimately freed them. She took a deep breath, determined to carry Mikhail's spirit with them as they moved on. The family loaded the last of their belongings into the car, their eyes lingering on the apartment one final time. The building, which had once held so much fear and dread, now seemed just a place, a silent witness to the horrors that had transpired within its walls. They drove away, the apartment growing smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared from sight. The road ahead was uncertain, but they felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was behind them, and they had the strength to face whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, the legend of the red spot began to spread among the townsfolk. Whispered conversations in the marketplace and hushed stories told around dinner tables kept the tale alive. People spoke of the family who had moved into the cursed apartment, the deaths that had followed, and the father who had made the ultimate sacrifice to save his loved ones. The legend served as a warning to others, a cautionary tale of the dangers that could lurk within the walls of seemingly ordinary places. The red spot, though faded, remained in the memories of those who heard the story, a symbol of both the darkness that had been defeated and the bravery that had triumphed over it. For Svetlana, Ivan, and Anya, life began to take on a new normalcy. They found a new home, one filled with light and hope. The scars of their ordeal would always be with them, but they grew stronger each day, bonded by the memory of Mikhail's love and sacrifice. As they settled into their new lives, they often spoke of Mikhail, keeping his memory alive through stories and shared moments. They honored him by living fully, embracing the future he had given them through his final act of bravery. The apartment on 14 Gorky Street stood silent, its walls holding the faint mark of a past filled with darkness and redemption. The legend of the red spot lived on, a story of warning and of the enduring power of love. Epilogue. Years passed, and the apartment at 14 Gorky Street stood silent and unoccupied, its dark history slowly fading from the collective memory of the townsfolk. The building remained, a stoic witness to the events that had unfolded within its walls, but its story became little more than a whispered legend, a cautionary tale for those who cared to listen. One sunny afternoon, a moving truck pulled up to the front of the building. A young family emerged, their faces alight with the excitement of a new beginning. The parents, Dmitry and Elena Petrova, smiled warmly at each other as they carried boxes and furniture into their new home. Their two children, Alexei and Marina, ran around the yard, their laughter echoing through the quiet street. Inside, the apartment felt welcoming and bright, a stark contrast to its former state of dread and despair. The faint mark of the red spot remained on the living room wall, barely noticeable among the fresh coat of paint and the new decorations that adorned the space. It was a small blemish, easily overlooked amidst the hustle and bustle of the family's move-in day. As the Petrovas settled into their new home, they marveled at the spacious rooms and the beautiful view from the windows. Elena placed a vase of fresh flowers on the dining table, the vibrant colors filling the room with life. Dmitry set up the children's bedrooms, ensuring that Alexei and Marina had everything they needed to feel comfortable and happy. Days turned into weeks, and the family quickly made the apartment their own. They hosted dinners with friends, celebrated birthdays, and filled the space with love and laughter. The faint mark on the living room wall remained unnoticed, a silent witness to the new life that blossomed around it. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet and the rest of the world slept, the mark seemed to pulse faintly, a barely perceptible reminder of the past. It waited patiently, hidden in plain sight, its true nature concealed beneath layers of paint and years of history. One evening, as Elena was tidying up the living room, she paused by the wall where the mark lingered. She reached out and lightly traced it with her fingers, a puzzled expression on her face. "Dmitry," she called, her voice curious. "Have you noticed this mark on the wall before?" Dmitry joined her, squinting at the faint stain. It's probably just an old stain," he said dismissively. "We can paint over it again if it bothers you." Elena shrugged, a slight unease tugging at her. "It's just strange, that's all. I wonder how it got there." But as quickly as the moment came, it passed, and the Petrovas returned to their evening routine, the mark forgotten for the time being. Life continued, filled with the ordinary joys and challenges of a young family. Yet the apartment held its breath, the faint mark a silent promise of what once was. The legend of the red spot lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to resurface. For though the past may fade, it never truly disappears. And in the quiet corners of 14 Gorky Street, the darkness waited, patient and ever watchful, for its story was not yet finished. The end.
Thanks for tuning in to our podcast. If you enjoyed our exploration of ghosts, mythical creatures, and urban legends, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling episodes. Until next time, my beloved listeners.